I'm Matt Lange. I am a music producer, a composer, a sound designer, and a DJ. These days I try to do mostly my own work because I just enjoy it the most, but I co-produced a BT record. I just worked on the most recent 30 Seconds to Mars record. Blake Lewis's third album, I did the whole thing. Tanya Zagara's debut album, did that one as well. I think it was just an inherent part of my artistic development that I needed to be able to combine sound design, music production, writing, everything. Ultimately, it was the ability to combine all of my influences, which ranged from metal to IDM, Aphex Twin, electronic music kind of stuff. So I chose to show Diverted because it really combines everything that I really love, where you have a lot of traditional instrumentation, you have a real piano, real guitar, it's me singing, but then on top of that, it really is a big hybrid of what I love from the sound design side to also the more traditional side. So as I go through the session, you can see it's a pretty big session, but the reason for that isn't because there are necessarily a million elements going on, but there was a lot of layering and a lot of doubling, and I'm going to start at the top, which are vocals, and from there I'll just work my way down. We have about 42 vocal channels, including sends, and the reason for that is in the verses there is a harmony and there is a lead, pretty much always, and there are a couple ad-libs as well. I saw your ghost flicker. Basically what's going on is the leads are panned dead center, and they're layered, a lead and a double. And then the harmonies are panned hard left and right. And they're mixed together going through a verse bus. And that verse bus is getting compressed, it's getting EQ'd. There's some multi-band compression going on, and multi-band compression is actually really my favorite trick for handling vocals. And then later it goes through the Empirical Labs Arouser, which is kind of my go-to compressor for a lot of different duties. When we get to the climax of a song, the way the vocals are arranged is a little bit different. It's not really a chorus because the song itself doesn't really have a verse-chorus format, but for the climax, there's an acoustic part where it's just acoustic guitar and the vocals, and I'll play it for you so you hear the difference. With every storm I've weathered, to your last breath I've treasured, you cast aside that feather, I thought we bled together. So what's just happened, and the reason why there are actually separate tracks for the doubles, is that when we're in the acoustic section, the lead's dead center, and then the doubles are also panned left and right, but they're not panned nearly as hard. They're a little bit more in the middle. I have both of them about 40 on either end, and they're mixed a little bit lower as well. But that way, when we get to really the heavy part, it was easier as opposed to doing a lot of automation than to just have separate channels. And now the verses are pretty much, or all the vocals are pretty much all at the same level, and they're panned hard left and right. And what that does, it's very subtle, but what happens is you have the smaller vocal that when you get to the hit, now it's a lot heavier and it sounds bigger. I take a lot of influence from actually pop when it comes to vocal production, the way vocals are layered, the way they're highly time-corrected and tuned. I like it when things are almost artificially perfect, but still retaining a sense of humanity within them. So let's talk about the drums. As you can see, there are a lot of drums. And the reason for that is, once again, they're all very heavily layered. I'm going to start at the kicks and then work my way down. There's really one main kick, and there are a few others get layered on top, but the most important one is this kick called DPO kick. And the DPO kick was made on a modular synthesizer right over there using a Make Noise DPO. And what's fun about it is we're basically using the same kick, but we're gating the length of it, and that determines kind of the weight of the kick, because there's a lot of sub in there. If you just hear it on its own, it's kind of like a long 808 style kick. But what I've done is on the initial downbeat, it's shorter, it's gated to be about an eighth note, and it's just a regular little fade. But then on the 3, then you get the really longer, heavier version of that kick. So when you have that with a clap, it accentuates the clap, makes the clap sound that much harder. And if you take away the kick, you can hear the clap really isn't actually that exciting at all. But together, it's big. I also have this very weird tonal, murky thing underneath the kick. And that's a shorter one. Underneath the clap, we have a longer one. And all it really does is it just adds some mud. And it's mud I wanted, and it's tonal mud. So it actually, in a way, emphasizes the tone of the kick itself, because you hear a lot more harmonics in the mud itself than you do in the actual kick. Then if we go down to the claps, once again, there's a lot. First one we have, that was also made on the modular, and it's just some weird FM synthesis stuff with a lot of distortion. It's a really ugly looking waveform, and it makes a great little click. Then underneath it, I have this, and that is actually me crunching leaves together and just panned hard left and right, multiple takes of it, just field recording. And again, it adds a really nice stereo width, and it's all on the high end. You don't hear any low end in it at all. So it just gives some crackle on the sides. And then after that, I also have some snaps. Just recorded here in this room, nothing more than that, and it's just me doing that. What I do a lot in my work is a lot of times I'll be taking sounds I'm making and I'm running it outside the box into distortion pedals, into outboard effects, and I always record it back in and then I edit the audio later. But everything really, a lot of it's really just made outside of the box, and it's going through a lot of outside processes. So once it's in the box, then I can really clean it up and use it exactly how I want to. Also, we have a snare. And it's just got a nice long plate reverb on it. If we go towards the end, where it all starts getting pretty dense, you're hearing a lot of real drums in there as well. And all it is really just a kind of basic breakbeat kind of thing. And layered underneath that also, then I have some drums I made with the Slate library, and these are used as fills. And they're filtered very just densely, just to give it a different kind of ambience. If everything's bright, it kind of ruins it, so this is a way to have some juxtaposition and contrast in the acoustic drum programming. We also have these blips underneath there, and they're called Omni Crush because they are totally just destroyed percussion using the Eventide Omnipressor. And it's just absolutely mangled. However, what's fun about it is what makes it sound the way it does is here's a version that hasn't been actually edited the same way. So in this, you can actually hear the transients, the hits of the original loop. But what I did is if we take these, and I'm just going to move this over so you can see the difference. You can see there have been fades stuck in every time a kick or a snare hit. So when I did that, I literally dragged my Omni Crush up to the top of where my kicks were, and I just started applying fades. And that way, every time a kick happened or a snare, there would be nothing fighting it. It's like a moving organism of rhythm where you have this constant sucking and pulling, and it really allows for a percussive sound that you can't get without actually doing these hard fades. But then when you add the fade version, it really just pulls underneath it, and it's a much cooler sound to me, and I like it. It's a taste thing, but I love that kind of stuff. Tangles all those webs you spin so well. Layering has always been a huge part of my sound, because really it's just a very successful way to make things sound huge. I think when I first really got into it, I was really into Devin Townsend's productions back then, whether it was the Devin Townsend Band or he produced a band called Misery Signals that I was really into when I was 20 or something like that. But he had that wall of sound, and it took the Phil Spector idea wall of sound and just exploded it. Now the bass is something I really like a lot, because the bass combines both real bass, like electric bass, as well as synthetic bass. The first of which is E-bass. And there are two layers. One's a DI, I recorded it, and then I time corrected it using Elastic Audio. You can see it's written X form right there. I typically do that with bass playing, guitars, anything, because I like really tight timing, so that is my way of doing it. That's really quick. Then for the subby electronic stuff, it's only 3 parts, and we have the top, which is just doing this kind of dubsteppy womp 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 kind of thing, but it really adds a lot of motion to the track. And you hear it in the track itself. The minute it kicks in, like it carries a lot of weight. This song was actually birthed on piano. I bought a Yamaha U3 in November, and it was, for me, one of the best things I've ever bought in my entire life, because it just expanded my compositional abilities. So this simple piano riff was one of the very first things I ever wrote, and I just really liked it because it kind of had this moody, atmospheric vibe to it. And where I started getting really creative with the piano was, this was a new experiment for me where I had never mic'd a piano before, ever. And first few attempts at it, it was just, I was awful at it. You know, it's a whole different ballgame. Pianos are really hard to record. And what I ended up settling on was taking all the panels off the front of the piano, and then I had the felt down because I just prefer the sound of a muted piano. So then I mic'd just each hand pretty much, or the range of each hand on the felt itself. And what ended up happening is then when you pan both the hands left and right, you're picking up all the hammers and all the attacks, and actually the sound of the felt itself, the sound of the hammer hitting the felt in these like high-end transients that you don't hear in a piano. So on its own, it sounds like this. There's a pretty high boost on the high end just to bring out the attacks of the hammers, and it's at 12K, it's about 6 dB. I'm also scooping out a fair amount of the low mids, a little bit of the mid mids, and a little bit of the high mids. But then we also have compression going on, once again using the arouser, and it's not heavy compression. You know, we're usually around 3 dB of reduction, tickling 5 on occasion. What I've also done with the piano is there are different piano tracks, usually for the same exact thing, but they're different EQ settings. And as the track itself gets bigger and bigger, you can't have the piano taking out the same amount of space. So if we go to this section here, which now we're in the second verse, there's a lot more going on than the first verse, which is very stripped back. So this piano, it's the same performance, very different EQ setting. So then when it goes back to this pre-chorus section, all the low end we took out to make room for the other low end in the verse now comes back in, so that way it fleshes out the arrangement again. But you don't miss it in the verse. And that is a way for really just to keep cohesion in the level of, keep cohesion in the frequency dynamic of the song, as well as excitement, the emotional impact of it. Also underneath the piano, and this is pretty minor, but I have a pad, and it is just this. It was made from the piano. This pad. And it's just the piano through GRM Tools Evolution. So just as an example, so we take this piano, go into GRM Tools, Evolution, and this is pretty much exactly how I did it. So I just used Audio Suite, and I preview it, and then I hit the Evolution button, and it freezes the sound. I stretched it out pretty far. And then I pitch shifted it up an octave. It's hard to have a metal guitar and a piano at the same time because the low mid range is just gonna take over everything. You're done. But when you have kind of like a Fender Twin style, like almost explosions in the sky post-rock twinkly guitar, on top of a piano, or the piano's providing all the low mids and really the lows in general, then you can have a guitar floating on top of it. And the two tones, they're similar enough that they complement each other very well without sounding too stagnant. And the two of them together, I just think that is a marriage I've always really liked. I'm going to start with the acoustic guitars. They don't come in till right before the climax of the song. They sound like this on their own. And that's good old reverse right there. That is just, reversing audio files is one of my favorite things ever, and I pretty much abuse that trick anytime I can. But so these guitars, they were recorded right in this room. It is a Taylor 414, and I had it tuned to a really, really open tuning. This track's in D minor, and I'm fairly certain the guitar was probably tuned something like D-A-D-D-D-D, which is ridiculous, but for the sake of having a really big open strum, you can't really get that any other way, and it's a very easy way and fun way to get these really big open chords. It is a very, 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 very modest plug-in chain. All we have, basic EQ, not doing much, basic compression. These are on the individual sides. And then on the actual bus itself, again, there's a little more EQ work, just low mids, low ends. I have the UA 1176 doing a little bit of 1 dB of reduction, but I also like a little bit of color it adds. And then there is a filter, and the filter gets used only in transitions. And I always liked filtered guitars. You only hear it at the very end, but it's effective. That's all it's doing. It's really simple. This just recorded with, it's a PRS 7-string guitar going through the Axe effects using an emulation of a Diesel VH4, which is really my favorite. VH4s have always been my favorite amps. Really, that is because I've always been obsessed with Tool for going on 20 years. But that plus the acoustic guitars together, that fills out the whole rhythm section of the guitars. And together, and the reason why you can see the acoustic guitars are cut up so much is because I actually played it and recorded it differently. And then when I came up with that rhythm on the electric guitar, I wanted the acoustic guitar to follow it. Since I had already recorded the guitar and I'd already time corrected it and I liked how it sounded, as opposed to redoing all that work, I just cut it and it sounds fine to me. Unless I told you, you wouldn't know I had done that. So then we have the tap guitars. And these are really fun because as a guitarist, tapping has always been one of my favorite things. Tapping really can give you a very interesting high interval jumping sound that it's much more difficult to do without tapping. So what this sounds like, what it's doing is this. And once again, delay and reverb are printed separately. My favorite thing about this part, aside from, I do like the pattern, I think it's rather fun and it was rather fun to play. Once again, reversing electric guitars is just the best sounding thing in the world to me ever. So if we take this tap reverb part, we take the reverse taps, and there's a little affected guitar right here. It's just such a cool effect. And I love that stuff. I get so off on reverse guitars, reverse pianos, reversed anything. So anytime I can abuse reversing an audio file, I do. And transitionally, it's such a fun and easy way to make a transition. I mean, if we look at this, you can see I'm actually using the reversed guitars as a turnaround every time something actually happens here. So if we go right here again, right before the acoustic guitar section comes in before the actual climax. there's that little hook. And that one little motif becomes a hook in its own right, that it kind of tricks you eventually, that now I know every time I hear a reverse guitar, that's signaling the change of something else. I've been a Pro Tools user for 14 or 15 years. And my workflow, as you've seen, it's so audio-based. Everything is editing audio, from even just recording directly into Pro Tools to later cutting it all up and treating Pro Tools essentially as my giant blender. So for me, there is really no other option. So as you saw, Diverted, it's a pretty big track. And just the amount of layers, the size of it, and on top of it, it's very dense. I work in this platform because so much of my audio editing, so much of my programming, so much of even my creativity to a certain degree is really inherently dependent on the way I can edit audio. And nothing has ever allowed me to edit audio the same way that Pro Tools does. And I'm personally on Pro Tools HD Native. I use interface-wise, I have a Pro Tools HD Omni as well as an HD I/O 16x16, and these are the brains of my studio. Everything I use gets routed through both the Omni and the HD I/O, and then it all ends up, of course, inside Pro Tools, where it just goes through a giant blender. And that is really, it's the centerpiece of my studio, it's how I work. I wouldn't be able to create the same way if I weren't using Pro Tools, and that's why I do.
The kiss that rips the skin, untangles all those webs you spin so